The moment I read the text from my husband, my heart dropped. I'm leaving you. I've emptied our joint account. He wasn't just walking away, he was stealing everything, including my future. Betrayal hit harder than I could have ever imagined, but little did he know this was the beginning of my greatest comeback. Welcome to today's story. Before we begin, I'd appreciate your support in helping me reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support will keep me motivated to share more great stories. Now, let's get into today's tale. Our protagonist is dealing with a painful betrayal from their spouse. A betrayal that changes their life forever. Have you ever been hurt by someone you trusted or had to rebuild your life from scratch? Stick around to see how the character rises from the ashes of betrayal and creates a new, stronger future. It all started with a text message. My phone buzzed in my hand while I was helping a customer at my boutique. The message was simple, but it felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. I'm leaving you. I'm moving to Miami with my new girlfriend. I've emptied our joint account. Have a nice life. The words were so cold, so calculated. I didn't even flinch. I simply helped the customer choose a scarf, trying to maintain my composure. But inside, a storm was brewing. My husband of 12 years, Jason, had just shattered everything. As the woman left the store, I locked the door, took a deep breath, and typed my response. Good luck. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal like I thought I would. It was more like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. The signs had been there for months, the late nights at work, the sudden changes in passwords, and his obsession with looking younger. I had suspected for a long time, but I never wanted to believe it. Until now. The irony was that Jason thought I would be devastated. But what he didn't know was that I had been planning my escape for a long time. A week earlier, when I noticed the changes in him, I had opened a separate bank account. I wasn't stupid. I had moved my savings there, leaving just enough in our joint account to avoid suspicion. It was time to act. I called my lawyer. It's happening, I said, my voice steady. He made his move. Let's get this started. The days that followed were a blur, a strange mix of numbness and clarity. My life, once a carefully constructed routine, felt like it was unraveling before me. Jason kept texting me, each one more condescending and patronizing than the last. His words were a calculated attempt to make me believe he was somehow doing me a favor by leaving. He sent messages about how you'll be fine and that he was happy for me to stay in the house. The gall of it. I was the one who had inherited that house from my grandmother. The place I had lived in long before Jason came into the picture. And now, he had the audacity to think he had any claim to it, to imply that I was somehow the one in the wrong here. The nerve. I could almost feel the weight of his smugness through the text messages. He probably thought that this would crush me, that I would fall apart at the thought of him walking away with everything. But he was wrong. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't even angry, not yet. In fact, I was strangely calm. Maybe it was the shock still clouding my mind. Or maybe it was something deeper. The part of me that had always known this moment would come, that had been quietly preparing for this day in the back of my mind. Jason didn't know it, but I had been anticipating his betrayal for months. The signs had been clear all along, like breadcrumbs scattered across the path he thought he was carefully laying out. His sudden obsession with looking younger, the long nights spent away, the password changes, and the way he spoke of the future as if we no longer shared any real vision of it. He had already begun his exit in every way, and now this text message was just the final piece to confirm what I already knew. But still, it was one thing to suspect something, and quite another to have it laid out so blatantly before me. Jason had just announced his grand escape with no consideration of what he was leaving behind. Not just the house, not just our marriage, but everything we had built together over the years. The trust, the memories, the life we had shared. To him, all of it was disposable. But to me, it meant everything. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I felt nothing. Not sorrow, not rage. Just a strange, almost cold clarity. Jason was gone, and in his departure, he had handed me the greatest gift I would ever receive. The opportunity to finally be free, to step away from a life that had become nothing more than an illusion. But I wasn't naive. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me. His words about the house and my future were empty, a shallow attempt to make me feel helpless. But I had already begun taking steps to protect myself. In the weeks leading up to this moment, When the signs had grown undeniable, I had quietly set my plan into motion. I had opened a separate bank account, one he knew nothing about. It wasn't much, just enough to safeguard myself in case the worst came to pass. But it was a start. A small victory, but an important one. I moved my personal savings into that account, and when Jason suggested, a few weeks earlier, that we combine our finances to make things simpler, I had agreed cheerfully. A few casual comments here and there, and all my money was safely tucked away out of his reach. He had no idea. In fact, I don't think he would have cared even if he had known. He believed that he could just walk away with everything, leaving me behind with nothing. His text messages, though, made it even easier to prepare for what was coming next. He bragged about his grand plan, about how he was going to start fresh with his young girlfriend. His carefree tone, the gleefulness that dripped from his words, only confirmed what I had suspected all along. Jason wasn't thinking straight. He was blinded by his selfish desires. He thought he could make a clean break, taking everything with him and leaving me to pick up the pieces. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. Not when I had fought so hard for everything I had. He didn't understand the lengths I was willing to go to protect what was mine, to make sure that this time he wouldn't win. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. Every single text. Every message he had sent, whether they were about his future with Melissa or his mockery of my age and my little business. They were all carefully preserved, each one adding more weight to the case I was building against him. The more I read his messages, the clearer it became. Jason had underestimated me. He thought I would be a sobbing wreck, pleading for him to come back, begging him to reconsider. But that wasn't who I was anymore. That wasn't the woman who had spent years building a life, building a business, and building the strength to stand on her own. He thought I was naive, that I wouldn't see through his lies, that I would just sit back and let him take everything. He couldn't have been more wrong. Each day, as Jason's messages continued to pour in, I grew more resolute. His casual cruelty, his assumption that I would fall apart, only fueled my determination to make sure he never took advantage of me again. Every time he texted, I would calmly log his words, storing them away as ammunition for the inevitable fight that was coming. I could almost feel the shift in the air, the calm before the storm. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was the hero. I was the one who would come out on top. I would rise from the ashes of this betrayal, and when the dust settled, Jason would realize that his plans had failed. His grand escape, his newfound freedom, would be nothing more than an illusion. Jason had set everything in motion with that one careless text. He thought it was the end of the story, but for me it was just the beginning. The day the papers were filed, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. It wasn't arrogance that made me stand tall. It was the quiet strength I had cultivated over the past few months. I had spent sleepless nights gathering evidence, consulting with my lawyer, and preparing myself emotionally for this moment. Jason thought he had one. He thought he was the one in control. But the truth was, he had no idea what he was walking into. Jason showed up in his new, tight clothes, clearly a desperate attempt to look younger. He had gone all out with his midlife crisis look. Tight jeans that looked like they were made for someone half his age, a jacket that didn't quite fit right, and shoes that screamed, "I'm trying too hard." It was almost laughable how hard he was trying to convince himself, and probably everyone else, that he hadn't fallen off the cliff of his own personal failure. But it was also painfully obvious. He was a man spiraling, clinging to his last vestiges of youth in a way that was only making him look more pathetic. I couldn't help but feel a brief moment of satisfaction as I looked at him. In his efforts to look young and carefree, he had completely missed the one thing that truly mattered, his own integrity. And now here he was, dressed in a way that screamed of desperation. But it was his character that had betrayed him, and no amount of clothing could cover that up. His lawyer, a slick-haired man who looked like he had just stepped out of a law firm commercial, fumbled with the papers. He tried his best to compose himself, but there was a nervous energy that radiated from him. He was clearly unprepared for what was coming. I had been told time and time again that the case was strong, but seeing it unfold in person was something else. My lawyer, calm and composed, had everything meticulously prepared. Jason's text messages, the fraudulent transactions on our joint credit card, the proof of the empty account, everything was laid out clearly in front of the judge. It was a solid case. There was no way Jason was going to worm his way out of this. Jason's defense was nothing more than a joke. It was an insult to the very idea of justice. He tried to claim that we grew apart, as if that was a valid excuse for what he had done. But the evidence told a completely different story. It was clear that this was not a matter of two people who had simply drifted apart over time. No, this was a calculated betrayal. He had stolen from me, both emotionally and financially, and now he was trying to paint himself as the victim. The judge didn't even flinch when Jason made his weak defense. He looked at Jason with a mixture of disbelief and disdain, before addressing him directly. You emptied a joint account and used shared credit cards for personal gain. Do you deny this? Jason squirmed in his seat, his earlier bravado evaporating in an instant. He tried to avoid eye contact with the judge, shifting uncomfortably as the weight of the situation began to settle in. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no denying it. Jason had taken money that wasn't his, and he had used it to fund a lavish life with his new girlfriend while I had been left to pick up the pieces of our shattered marriage. His lawyer attempted to intervene, but the judge waved him off, clearly unimpressed. There was no need for further argument. The facts were laid out and there was no escaping them. Jason's attempt to justify his actions with a tired, half-baked excuse fell on deaf ears. The judge turned back to Jason, his voice stern and resolute. The court finds you guilty of fraud, and as such, I am ordering you to return the money you took from the joint account immediately. Additionally, all shared assets are to be frozen until the final settlement is reached. You will not have access to any further funds or property until this case is resolved. I watched Jason's face as the reality of the situation began to sink in. His cheeks flushed, and for the first time I saw the cracks in his facade. He was no longer the confident man who had strutted into the courtroom just moments before. Now, he looked like a man who had just realized that his entire world was falling apart. His eyes flickered nervously, and his jaw tightened. But there was nothing he could do. The judge's decision was final. As the gavel came down with a decisive thud, marking the end of the proceedings, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the kind of victory that felt sweet or triumphant. It was a victory for justice, a victory for doing what was right. Jason had believed he could walk away from our marriage, taking everything with him, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of my life. But today, the scales of justice had tipped in my favor. I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of the situation wash over me. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. But in that silence, I felt a sense of calm. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control of my life again. Jason had underestimated me. He thought I was just going to sit back and let him walk all over me. But today, I had shown him that I was stronger than he thought. I wasn't the naive woman he had left behind. I was someone who could stand up for herself, who could take control of her own future. As the courtroom began to clear, I looked over at Jason one last time. He was still sitting there, his face a mixture of disbelief and frustration. He couldn't understand how he had lost, how someone like me had outsmarted him. But the truth was, he had never understood me. He had never understood what I was capable of. The road ahead would still be difficult. There were battles left to fight, and the emotional toll of everything would linger. But for now I had won. And that was enough. The judge's order was just the beginning. There was still much to be done, but this was a major step forward. The weight of the years of betrayal, of Jason's cruel text messages, of the life I had been forced to pick up the pieces of, all of it had been validated today. The battle wasn't over, but the foundation had been laid, and I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, a chaotic but strangely invigorating mix of legal battles and personal triumphs. The legal process was long, drawn out, and filled with moments of tension, but I had already anticipated every move Jason would make. I had prepared myself for this moment months ago, and I wasn't about to let him derail everything I had worked for. Jason thought he could simply waltz away with everything, our money, our shared assets, and all the things he believed were his by right. But what he didn't know was that I had been watching, waiting, and quietly building a fortress around myself. I was ready. He wasn't. I kept my boutique running smoothly, a feat I had learned to master after years of hard work. But now, there was a new energy in the air. It wasn't just about the sales or the products. It was about proving to myself and to everyone else that I could succeed on my own. I had always poured my heart and soul into this shop, but now it felt like it had a deeper meaning. It wasn't just a business, it was my rebirth, my sanctuary. As the weeks passed, I pushed forward. The space was alive with the hum of activity. I had started expanding my product lines, introducing new items that were more aligned with what my customers were asking for. Each day, new shipments arrived, and each day I worked tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect. The boutique became my new home, my pride and joy. I even brought in a couple of new employees to help manage the growing demand. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was building something bigger than just a business. I was creating a legacy. The best part? The customers started flocking in not just for the products, but to show their support. It was something I hadn't expected, but in retrospect, it made perfect sense. The word of Jason's betrayal spread like wildfire. People weren't just shopping. They were standing by me, showing solidarity and rallying around my strength. Women came in and left with bags they hadn't planned on buying, all because they wanted to show their support for me. Their words were kind, and their gestures were even kinder. Many of them had been through their own struggles, divorce, heartbreak, personal battles, and they saw in me a reflection of their own journey. It felt as though, with every purchase, I was not only regaining what was rightfully mine, but also strengthening the bond one had with the community I had built. It wasn't just about the money, though that was certainly important. It was about the emotional connection that had been formed. And it was real. The faces of the women who came into my store every day were filled with admiration, and I realized that I had become something more than just a business owner. I had become a symbol of resilience, of rising from the ashes of betrayal. Jason, on the other hand, had no idea what hit him. His attempts to win back his girlfriend, Melissa, were falling apart faster than I had anticipated. She had grown disillusioned with him, and I wasn't surprised. What had once seemed like a fairy tale to him, full of youthful promises and unrealistic expectations, had quickly turned sour. Jason couldn't even afford the lifestyle he once promised her. His finances were in shambles. He had no steady income, no access to our joint funds, and no real foundation to support the lavish lifestyle he had once flaunted. I had seen it coming. Melissa, for her part, had begun to see through his facade. She realized that the man she had been so taken with wasn't the carefree, successful person he had portrayed. He was broken, and as she distanced herself from him, I knew that Jason was left with nothing. His world was slowly crumbling piece by piece. His desperation was palpable, but his actions were only pushing people away. As for me, I was thriving. In every way, I was growing, both personally and professionally. My boutique was expanding, and with it, my reputation. My name was becoming synonymous with success, real, hard-earned success. No longer was I the woman whose life had been upended by betrayal. I was the woman who had found her way again. The woman who had taken back control and transformed her life into something beautiful and sustainable. The community had rallied behind me, yes, but I had also done something for myself that I hadn't thought possible before. I'd begun to believe in my own worth again. I'd rediscovered my passion for my business and realized that I didn't need anyone to validate me. I was capable of greatness on my own, and the success I was experiencing wasn't just about monetary gain. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my peace of mind, and my happiness. Jason's world, meanwhile, was collapsing around him. He had underestimated me. He thought that by running off with his young girlfriend, he could escape the consequences of his actions. But life doesn't work that way. You can't just erase the impact of betrayal with a new relationship or a fresh start in a different city. It follows you. It haunts you. And Jason, it seemed, was haunted by the wreckage he had caused. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of his behavior, trying to please him, trying to keep him happy. But now, I saw the man he truly was. A man who was incapable of loyalty, who had chosen a fleeting pleasure over everything that had mattered to him. And I realized that I had made the right choice in walking away. I had made the right choice in choosing myself. The truth was, Jason's actions were not only a betrayal of me, but of everyone who had ever trusted him. He was left alone, wallowing in his mistakes, while I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me. People who admired my strength, my perseverance, and my ability to rebuild when everything seemed lost. As the weeks went by and my business continued to grow, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. Jason had tried to destroy me, to break me down, but instead, he had given me the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to rebuild my life on my own terms. And in that rebuilding, I had found something far more valuable than money or success. I had found my own sense of worth, my own identity, and a future that I could shape for myself, free from the chains of my past. Jason's world was collapsing, while mine was only just beginning to rise. The best revenge wasn't in getting back at him. The best revenge was succeeding beyond his wildest dreams, and proving to myself that I was more than capable of thriving on my own. A few months later, I received a call from my lawyer. Jason had tried to challenge the divorce settlement again, but it was dismissed with ease. I wasn't surprised. He had no case, not really. Every time he attempted to make an argument, his own actions worked against him, and the court saw that. He had no leverage anymore. It was almost comical to think he believed he could overturn what had been so carefully and justly decided. With every petition he filed, he lost. The first few times, I had worried about the long, drawn-out process, the emotional toll it would take. But as the weeks went by, I started to see his efforts for what they were: desperate, futile attempts to reclaim some sense of control over a life he had thrown away. The more he tried, the more his own failures became glaringly obvious to everyone around him. His credibility in the courtroom was slipping, and even his lawyer seemed less sure with each motion. His actions only made my case stronger and his reputation weaker. As his chances of reversing the settlement crumbled, something else was beginning to rise from the ashes of my own past: the grand opening of my second boutique. It felt surreal, this moment of triumph, and I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The media was buzzing, and this time it wasn't because I was the scorned wife. No, I wasn't the sad, pitiful woman people had assumed I would be. Instead, the media was covering a woman who had taken the greatest blow of her life and used it to build something even greater than what she had lost. I had built a life, brick by brick, and now it was thriving. The camera flashes weren't pitying me. They were celebrating me. As I cut the ribbon at my new store, I felt a rush of emotions. The journey I had walked was not an easy one. Betrayal, heartache, and struggle had filled the pages of my past. But standing there, in front of my new boutique, I saw how far I had come. What Jason thought would destroy me had, instead, led to my redemption. And that wasn't just about the business. It was about everything I had overcome, everything I had rebuilt from the rubble of my former life. But as I stood there, surrounded by friends, family, and loyal customers, I thought about the women who had supported me through it all. It wasn't just my strength or my determination that had gotten me here. It was the women who believed in me, who stood by me, who lifted me up when I had felt like I was falling. They saw the potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself, and they gave me the courage to keep going. The opening was more than just a business milestone. It was a statement. A statement that no one, not even Jason, could take away from me what I had worked so hard for. When he sent that cruel text, thinking it would break me, he had no idea it would be the spark that ignited a fire in me. It had been a blow, yes, but it had also marked the beginning of something new. Something much bigger than the life I had once known. This life, my new life, was one I had earned. And it was stronger, wiser, and full of promise. The pain, the anger, and the betrayal had been part of the process, but they no longer defined me. They had molded me into someone better. Someone more focused, more determined, and more willing to fight for what was rightfully mine. I had learned that true success was not just about building a business or acquiring wealth. It was about building resilience and strength in the face of adversity. As for Jason, well, he was still trying to put the pieces of his life back together. He had moved in with his parents, a stark contrast to the life of luxury he had once promised Melissa. He was struggling to make ends meet, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because he had no one else to blame but himself. His dreams had crumbled, and no amount of pride or superficial charm could bring them back. He had believed that running off with his younger girlfriend would be the escape he needed, but it had only led him into a spiral of failure and regret. I didn't feel sympathy for him. I had once been the one who tried to hold everything together, to make excuses for his actions. But that person, the one who was afraid to let go, no longer existed. The Jason I had known, the man I had once loved, was nothing more than a shadow now. And that was his own doing. I didn't need to get even. I had already won. My success, my ability to rise above the chaos, was the ultimate victory. The best revenge wasn't about making him feel the same pain he had caused me. It was about proving that I could take everything he had thrown at me and turn it into something far better. I had become the woman I was always meant to be. Strong, independent, unshakable. Jason had underestimated me, but it was his underestimation that had given me the push I needed to go further, to be better. And as for the life I had built, well, it was everything I had dreamed of and more. It wasn't perfect. There were still struggles, still moments of doubt, but it was mine. It was real. And it was filled with the promise of more to come. My boutique was just the beginning. With each new step I took, I could feel the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. And with every customer who walked through the door, with every woman who shared her story with me, I knew that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. And I had done just that. What are your thoughts on today's story? I'd love to hear your reflections or any feedback you may have. Feel free to leave a comment. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next exciting chapter. Your support means a lot and inspires me to keep sharing more stories. Thank you so much for listening until the very end.